Thank you. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Thanks, everyone.
Tout d'abord,
Firstly, I'd like to start by mentioning how important it is for me that this event be held here in Quebec. That's my boy. He wants to be with Mommy. Almost a year ago, to the day, I was on a similar stage introducing my husband as the new leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. It was also an opportunity for me to introduce myself to you, to Canada and Quebec. Some were surprised to hear me speak French fluently. Some even said that it wasn't just French I was speaking, but Quebec French. And it's true, it is Quebec French I speak, because I remember that Quebec welcomed my family and myself when we immigrated to Canada. I remember that Quebec is where I grew up and where I flourished. I also remember that the culture here in Quebec is what we first embraced. I listened to bands such as Ukume, Les Colocs, and Dogmatique, and TV shows like La Petite Vie, Watatatao, Un gars, une fille, and many more. I remember that Quebec became my home thanks to Quebecers that welcomed me and made me feel at home here. I remember, and I will always remember, that it's in Quebec where my family and I got our start in Canada. Thank you, Quebec.
happy to be here in Quebec. Quebec welcomed my family and I when we immigrated to Canada. And I'm thankful for the warmth welcome and the opportunities we had. Almost 1 year ago, I found myself on a similar stage, introducing my husband as our new leader. It was also an opportunity to introduce myself to you, Canada and Quebec. An immigrant woman raised in a working class neighborhood of Montreal, Quebec. Introducing an Albertan who speaks French and who represents an Ontario riding and who was adopted by 2 school teachers with an intriguing last name that almost no one has ever heard before. And let's be honest, that many still don't know how to pronounce. Une femme immigrante.
An immigrant woman from a working-class neighborhood in Montreal, and my husband, an Albertan who speaks French and represents an Ontario riding, adopted by 2 school teachers with an intriguing last name. And let's be honest, it's only in Quebec that we only pronounce it correctly.
That unity that we have is what we want for our Canada, where regardless of your region or your background, we are all Canadians, united through our common values, through our love for our true North, strong and free. No more hyphenated Canadian. I was raised by parents living paycheck to paycheck. In our first years in Canada, there were times when we needed to visit the food bank. Our first Christmas gift were a donation by the Saint Vincent Paul organization. My brother and I, present here tonight, Louis, we both started playing organized sports only when we both started working at McDonald's because we had to pay for it ourselves. Our parents couldn't afford it. Soccer and flag football avec les Patriotes de Pointe-aux-Trembles. It's still among my favorite childhood memories. Nos débuts au Canada.
Our beginnings in Canada were tough, but for my family, it was a sacrifice that was worth it for the future of their children. It was worth it because they were optimistic about the future.
¿Qué hizo mi familia en tant qu'inmigrantes? De dejar todo atrás y empezar desde cero. Fue un sacrificio que a la época valió la pena por el futuro de nosotros, sus hijos. Pero hoy en día, el sueño canadiense se está evaporando. Estas oportunidades ya no existen. Señores y señoras, necesitamos un cambio hacia el sentido común. So, unfortunately, today all the hope is drifting for almost all Canadians. Malheureusement, cet optimisme.
Unfortunately, this optimism, this hope is drifting for all Canadians.
My husband and I have been hearing more and more from everyday people on the ground. Pierre and I recently crisscrossed the country to hear people's stories directly from them. Ces histoires sont.
These stories are full of suffering and, yes, sometimes also anger.
In distress and hopeless is when leadership is most necessary. It is when we must show up directly to look at them in the eyes and to hear them out.
True leadership means understanding that often what's at the root of that anger and that suffering is just day-to-day suffering.
And we won't always agree with one another. But when someone shows you pain and fear, it is not the time to turn your back on them or to call them names.
Each of you deserves to be heard loud and clear, even when that has downsides, even when we disagree.
Notre pays souffre actuellement. Non, vous ne devrez pas rester silencieux. During our journey crisscrossing the country, I was there, not just as Pierre's wife. I was there as the mother of 2 young children. I was there as a sister to 5 incredible siblings. I was there as the daughter of a hardworking immigrant who gave all up for what was the Canadian dream. And I was there as a patriotic Canadian who cares. J'ai fortement ressenti.
I felt all of the stories people shared with me.
Mother in Northern Ontario, who initially showed up with anger, but quickly showed her pain as she shared with me how she just lost her 2 sons, her only children, to a drug overdose. Un fils,
a son who lost his father to suicide because the financial burden on his shoulders was too much to bear.
Homes in Penticton because they can no longer afford life because of skyrocketing inflation in their fixed income. Les histoires se suivent.
Stories that are each more devastating than the last, but these are true stories. They're true and real people.
It's great. And it is not an easy one, but it is a very important one. Donc, la tâche devant.
The job is great. And it's not easy, but it's a very important one.
You get to watch my husband in action in the thick of it. I get to watch him behind the scenes. In his home office, quiet, by himself, reading, analyzing, meticulously looking at the information available and the facts. La majorité d'entre vous,
Most of you see my husband in action. I get to see him behind the scenes, in our intimacy. Alone, he sits quietly in his office, reading and meticulously looking at all the information and facts in front of him.
all watch on television and love, represent hours of Pierre studying the issues and thoroughly understanding them. Les échanges que vous regardez à la...
The exchanges you all watch on television and love represent hours of Pierre studying the issues and thoroughly understanding them.
is how he was ahead of the curve and predicted the painful inflation Canadians are living today. 2 years before the so-called experts and people in charge. C'est ainsi
That's how he was ahead of the curve and predicted the painful inflation Canadians are living today. 2 years before the so-called experts and people in charge predicted it.
when no cameras are rolling or photographers conveniently waiting. J'ai la chance de le voir en action.
I can see him in action. No cameras, no photographers.
Loving and proud father of two, of a handsome 2-year curly blondie who loves to play ball with daddy and who likes to interrupt mommy's speeches, and a beautiful princess of almost 5 years old with special needs who needs her daddy's love and protection. Il est un fier père.
He is a very loving and proud father of two, of a handsome 2-year-old curly blonde boy who loves to play ball with daddy, and a beautiful princess of almost 5 years with special needs who needs her daddy's love and protection.
Embarking on this journey is not an easy task, and it requires great sacrifice for us, for our family. Being away from our babies has not been easy. So let me tell you that we would not be doing this if we didn't believe that this is a necessary fight to take on for our children. But whenever I think we have it tough, I remember the extraordinary people that carry the country on their shoulders. The nurse, the waitress, the plumber, and yes, the trucker, who are suffering more. More and can't even afford a roof over their heads and food on the table and gas in their tanks. S'embarquer dans cette aventure n'est pas une tâche.
Embarking on this journey is not easy. It requires sacrifice for us, for our family. It's not easy to be away from our children. So let me tell you, we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't feel this fight was necessary for the future of our children. But when I think I have it tough, I remember the extraordinary people that carry the country on their shoulders. The nurse, the waitress, the plumber, and yes, the trucker, who are suffering. Who are suffering more than us and can't even afford a roof over their heads, food on the table, and gas in their tanks.
Mesdames et messieurs, it is my pleasure to share with you my husband, mon mari,
my husband and the next Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Poilievre.